The cameras were rolling on a scorching afternoon in Monument Valley, when everything went catastrophically wrong. One moment, a professional stuntman was executing a routine horsefall he'd performed dozens of times before. The next moment, he was lying motionless in the red dust, while the film crew watched in frozen horror. What happened in the minutes and hours after that accident would reveal something about John Wayne that Hollywood never saw, that the public never knew, and that remained hidden for 4 decades. This isn't a story about movie magic or Hollywood glamour. It's about what happens when the entertainment industry's machinery crushes a human life, and about one man's quiet decision to do something extraordinary when nobody was watching. It's about guilt, responsibility, and the burden of carrying secrets that could destroy careers and reputations. Most of all, it's about a promise kept in the darkness, a commitment maintained year after year with no recognition, no praise, and no witnesses. The stuntman's name was Jack Tyree. He was 37 years old, married, with 3 children under the age of 10. On the day he died, he was doing his job on a John Wayne Western, performing the kind of dangerous work that made heroes look heroic on screen. When that job killed him, John Wayne made a decision that would define the rest of his life, and he made sure that decision stayed secret until long after he was gone. What happened next is a story about character when nobody's looking, about the difference between the person we present to the world and the person we really are. It's about doing the right thing even when doing the right thing can't fix what's broken, can't bring back what's lost, can't undo the damage that's been done. Monument Valley in the summer of 1954 was brutal. Temperatures climbed past 100 degrees by midday, and the red sand seemed to radiate heat like a furnace. The film crew working on The Searchers had been shooting for weeks, pushing through exhaustion and discomfort to capture John Ford's vision of the American West. Jack Tyree had been in the business for 12 years. He'd started as a rodeo rider before transitioning to stunt work, bringing genuine cowboy skills to an industry that desperately needed them. He was good at his job, professional, reliable, fearless in the way you needed to be to throw yourself off horses for a living. Directors requested him specifically. Actors trusted him to make them look authentic. The shot that day seemed straightforward. Tyree would ride at full gallop, take a simulated gunshot, and fall from the horse in a way that looked violent, but was actually carefully controlled. He'd done variations of this stunt hundreds of times. He knew how to roll, how to protect his head and spine, how to make death look real while staying very much alive. But something went wrong. Maybe the horse stumbled at the wrong moment. Maybe the timing was off by a fraction of a second. Maybe it was just bad luck, the universe's indifference to human planning and preparation. Whatever the reason, when Tyree hit the ground, he hit wrong. The sound of impact was different. Anyone who'd been on sets long enough knew the difference between a good fall and a bad one. The crew rushed over. Tyree wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. The set medic arrived within seconds, then immediately called for an ambulance. But everyone watching already knew. You could see it in the absolute stillness of Tyree's body, in the unnatural angle of his neck. Some injuries you survive. This wasn't one of them. John Wayne had been watching from behind the cameras. He wasn't in this particular shot, but he made a point of observing stunt work, understanding the risks the men took to make him look heroic. When Tyree fell, Wayne started moving before anyone else, his long stride covering ground quickly. He reached the dying stuntman, just as the medic confirmed what everyone feared. What happened in that moment Wayne never discussed publicly. Those who were close enough to see said the Duke's face went completely white. His hands were shaking as he knelt in the dust next to Tyree's body. Someone heard him whisper, "Jesus Christ, no. Not like this." The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, but there was nothing to be done. Jack Tyree was pronounced dead at the scene. Cause of death, broken neck, massive trauma, instantaneous. A professional doing his job. A routine stunt gone wrong. A man who kissed his wife goodbye that morning and never came home. John Ford, the legendary director, called a wrap for the day. The crew packed up equipment in silence, everyone avoiding eye contact, everyone processing what they'd just witnessed. These were tough men who'd seen plenty of injuries on sets, But death was different. Death made it all feel obscene. The make-believe, the pretending, the idea that anything they were doing mattered enough to justify this cost. Wayne drove back to the hotel alone, refusing company, refusing conversation. Those who saw him said he looked like he'd aged 10 years in an afternoon. He went to his room and didn't emerge for the rest of the night. Nobody knew what he was doing in there, what he was thinking, what decisions he was making. But when he came out the next morning, something had changed. The funeral was held in Los Angeles 4 days later. Jack Tyree was buried with full honors from the Stuntmen's Association, surrounded by colleagues who understood exactly what risks he'd taken and exactly how little recognition stunt performers received for those risks. The widow, Mary Tyree, sat in the front row with her 3 children, ages 9, 7, and 4, trying to maintain composure while her entire world collapsed around her. John Wayne attended the funeral. So did John Ford, and most of the cast and crew from The Searchers. It was expected, proper, the kind of thing Hollywood did when tragedy struck. Wayne spoke briefly to Mary Tyree, offering condolences that felt inadequate and hollow even as he spoke them. What do you say to a woman who's just lost her husband, to children who'll grow up without a father? Sorry seems obscene. Any words seem obscene. But Wayne did something else that day, something nobody knew about until decades later. He asked Mary Tyree for her address, wrote it down carefully, and promised her something in private. The exact words were never revealed, but the commitment he made that day would shape the next quarter century of his life. Within a week, Mary Tyree received an envelope at her home. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000, roughly $50,000 in today's money, and a brief handwritten note. The note simply said, "For immediate expenses, more will follow. You and your children will be taken care of. G.W." Mary Tyree had no idea what "more will follow" meant. She assumed it was a one-time payment, a generous gesture from a wealthy movie star trying to ease his conscience. She cashed the check, paid for the funeral, covered some bills, and tried to figure out how she was going to survive as a single mother with 3 children and 9. The following month, another check arrived. Same amount. Another brief note. This will continue. And it did continue. Every single month, for the next 25 years, until John Wayne's death in 1979, Mary Tyree received a check. Sometimes the amount varied, more at Christmas, extra when the kids needed school clothes or medical care, but it never stopped. Rain or shine, whether Wayne was working or not, whether he was wealthy or struggling financially himself, that check showed up like clockwork. Wayne never publicized the arrangement, never told the press, never used it for positive publicity or to burnish his image. He simply sent the money, month after month, year after year, because he'd made a promise, and because he believed it was the right thing to do. But there was more to the arrangement than just money. Wayne also made sure the Tyree children had opportunities. When the oldest wanted to go to college, Wayne quietly paid the tuition, not through a scholarship fund or a publicized donation, but through direct, anonymous payment to the university. When the middle child needed surgery, Wayne covered the medical bills. When the youngest struggled in school and needed a tutor, Wayne hired one and paid for it personally. Mary Tyree tried to thank him once, early in the arrangement. She called his production company, asked to speak with him directly. When she finally got through, she started to express her gratitude. Wayne cut her off. "Don't thank me," he said, his voice rough. "Your husband died making me look good on screen. This is the least I can do, the absolute least. And I'd appreciate if we kept this between us. This isn't charity, it's not generosity, it's obligation." Those close to John Wayne family, close friends, business partners, noticed changes after Jack Tyree's death, but most didn't connect them to that specific incident. Wayne had witnessed plenty of set accidents before. The movie industry was dangerous, especially for stunt performers and extras. Why would this one particular death affect him so differently? The answer was complicated and rooted in things Wayne rarely discussed: responsibility, masculinity, and what it means to be the face of dangerous work that other people actually perform. Wayne made his career playing tough guys, soldiers, cowboys, men of action, but he wasn't actually doing most of the dangerous stuff. Stuntmen were. Men like Jack Tyree were getting hurt, taking risks, occasionally dying, all so Wayne could look heroic without actually facing the consequences of heroism. Wayne understood this intellectually, but Tyree's death made it visceral, undeniable, crushing. In the years after Tyree's death, Wayne became obsessed with set safety. He'd halt production if he thought something was too dangerous. He'd argue with directors about stunts, insisting on additional precautions even when it slowed filming or increased costs. Some directors found it frustrating. The Duke had never been this cautious before. But Wayne didn't care. He'd watched a good man die, and he wasn't going to let it happen again if he could prevent it. He also changed how he interacted with stunt performers. Before Tyree's death, Wayne treated stuntmen with respect, but also with a certain distance. They were professionals doing a job, and he was the star. After Tyree's death, Wayne went out of his way to know the stuntmen personally. He learned their names, their families' names, their backgrounds. He invited them to his poker games, included them in social events, treated them as equals rather than hired help. His daughter Isa later wrote about this transformation. Something changed in Dad after that stuntman died. He became almost obsessive about knowing the men who did his stunts, about making sure they were protected, about treating them with dignity. We didn't understand it at the time. Only later did we realize he was carrying guilt about something none of us knew about. The guilt manifested in other ways, too. Wayne became a fierce advocate for stunt performers within the industry, pushing for better safety standards, better insurance, better compensation. He used his considerable influence to pressure studios and the Screen Actors Guild to implement new protections. He didn't do press conferences or make public statements. That wasn't his style, but behind closed doors he fought battles that improved conditions for hundreds of workers. When the Stuntmen's Association was formed in 1961, Wayne was one of its earliest and most generous supporters. He donated money, lent his name and prestige, attended fundraisers, but he never explained why he cared so much. People assumed it was just Wayne being a good guy, supporting the working man. Nobody knew about the monthly checks to marry Tyree, about the promise he'd made and the guilt he carried. For 25 years, John Wayne kept his promise to marry Tyree. Through 3 more marriages, through career ups and downs, through political controversies and personal struggles, those monthly payments continued without interruption. And for 25 years, almost nobody knew. Mary Tyree honored Wayne's request for discretion. She didn't tell friends or extended family about the arrangement. When people asked how she was managing financially as a widow, she gave vague answers about insurance and savings. She raised her children, got a job as a secretary, lived modestly, and quietly deposited those monthly checks while being grateful for them. The checks allowed her to stay in the family home rather than being forced to move to cheaper housing. They allowed her children to attend decent schools, participate in activities, have opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. The money didn't replace their father, nothing could, but it gave them stability in the aftermath of catastrophic loss. Wayne's family didn't know the full extent of the arrangement. His business managers handled the payments, categorizing them in ways that didn't attract attention. Wayne's wives knew he sent money to a stuntman's widow, but didn't know how much or for how long. His children had no idea at all. Wayne compartmentalized this commitment, keeping it separate from the rest of his life, never discussing it except when absolutely necessary. There were close calls over the years, moments when the secret almost came out. A journalist researching Wayne's finances for a profile noticed recurring payments to M. Tyree and asked about it. Wayne's lawyer deflected, claiming it was a business matter. A family friend saw one of the checks being written and asked who Mary Tyree was. Wayne said she was the widow of an old friend and changed the subject. The closest the secret came to exposure was in 1976, when Wayne was diagnosed with stomach cancer. As he underwent surgery and faced his own mortality, he became concerned about what would happen to Mary Tyree and her family if he died. The children were mostly grown by then. The oldest was in his 30s, the youngest in his early 20s, but Wayne felt his obligation hadn't ended. He called his lawyer and restructured his will to include a provision for Mary Tyree. If he died, she would receive a lump sum payment, enough to maintain her lifestyle for the rest of her life. The provision was buried deep in the will, listed among various other bequests and trusts, unlikely to attract attention. Wayne specified that if anyone asked about it, the explanation should be simple: a debt owed to an old friend. Wayne survived the cancer, at least temporarily, and the payments continued. When he died in 1979, the provision in his will was executed as planned. Mary Tyree received her final payment from John Wayne, a sum large enough to ensure she'd never worry about money again. The secret might have stayed buried forever, if not for Mary Tyree's decision to tell the story late in her own life. In 1994, 40 years after her husband's death and 15 years after Wayne's passing, Mary gave an interview to a small film industry magazine. She was in her 70s by then, her children grown with families of their own. She felt that enough time had passed, that she could honor Wayne's memory by revealing what he'd done. "John Wayne supported my family for 25 years, she told the interviewer. Not because he had to, not because anyone forced him, not because he wanted publicity or recognition. He did it because he believed it was right, because a good man died on his set, and because he felt responsible." The interview caused a sensation when it was picked up by larger media outlets. Here was a story that completely contradicted the popular image of John Wayne as a hard-right conservative who only cared about himself and his politics. Here was evidence of sustained, private generosity that had gone unrecognized for decades. Mary Tyree shared details that made the story even more remarkable. She told about the extra payments at Christmas, about Wayne personally paying for her son's college education, about the medical bills he'd covered, about the time he'd called her himself to check on how the family was doing. She produced canceled checks, letters, documents proving every claim. "He never wanted anyone to know," Mary said. "He told me it wasn't charity, that he was just doing what should be done. He said my husband gave his life for a movie and that meant something, meant an obligation. He kept that obligation for a quarter-century without anyone knowing." That tells you who John Wayne really was. The revelation forced a reconsideration of Wayne's character and legacy. Critics who'd dismissed him as a right-wing blowhard had to acknowledge this evidence of genuine compassion. Fans who'd loved him for his on-screen heroism discovered he'd been quietly heroic in real life, in ways nobody had known. The story humanized Wayne, showed dimensions to his character that the public persona had hidden. Wayne's children were shocked. None of them had known the full extent of their father's commitment to the Tyree family. Issa Wayne, who'd written a tell-all book about her father that included plenty of criticism, publicly stated she wished she'd known about this side of him. "It would have changed some of my judgments," she admitted. "I saw his flaws up close, but I didn't see this. I wish I had." The Stuntmen's Association used the revelation to push for industry changes Wayne had advocated for privately during his lifetime. They established the John Wayne Jack Tyree Memorial Fund to support families of stunt performers killed or seriously injured on set. The fund continues to operate today, ensuring Wayne's private commitment has become a public legacy. The story of John Wayne's secret support for Jack Tyree's family raises profound questions about character, responsibility, how we measure a person's worth. Wayne could have done the minimum, sent flowers to the funeral, made a single donation, issued a public statement of regret. Nobody would have criticized him. The accident wasn't his fault. He hadn't been directing, hadn't designed the stunt, hadn't been anywhere near the decision-making that led to Tyree's death. But Wayne didn't do the minimum, he did the maximum. He took on a burden he didn't have to carry, maintained it for 25 years, and demanded nothing in return. Not gratitude, not recognition, not even acknowledgement. That kind of sustained private generosity reveals something essential about a person's character. It reveals that Wayne understood something many people miss, that responsibility isn't just about legal liability. It's about being part of systems that harm people, about benefiting from other people's risks, about acknowledging the human cost of your success. Stunt performers were getting hurt and occasionally killed to make John Wayne a star. He profited enormously from their risks. When one of those risks killed Jack Tyree, Wayne chose to accept a responsibility nobody else was acknowledging. The secrecy is equally revealing. In an industry built on publicity, where every charitable act gets photographed and every donation gets announced, Wayne chose silence. He didn't want credit. He didn't want to be seen as noble or generous. He just wanted to keep a promise and fulfill what he saw as an obligation. That kind of private integrity is increasingly rare. The story also reveals the complexity of human character. Wayne was far from perfect. He had multiple failed marriages marked infidelity. He made racist statements that damaged his legacy. He took political positions many found objectionable. He could be difficult, demanding, and occasionally cruel to people around him. But he also kept a promise to a widow for 25 years. He used his wealth and influence to quietly improve conditions for stunt performers. He carried guilt about a man's death and channeled that guilt into action rather than defensiveness or denial. He was capable of sustained, selfless generosity that asked nothing in return. This is what real human beings are like: contradictory, flawed, capable of both terrible and admirable actions. Wayne wasn't a hero or a villain. He was a complicated man who made some good choices and some bad ones, who carried guilt and tried to make amends, who succeeded in some ways and failed in others. Mary Tyree died in 2002, 23 years after John Wayne's death and 48 years after her husband's fatal accident. In her obituary, her children included a line that read, "She was sustained through the darkest period of her life by the extraordinary generosity of John Wayne, who kept a promise for 25 years and asked nothing in return." The three Tyree children, all successful adults by the time their mother died, had complicated feelings about Wayne's support. They were grateful, obviously. Their lives had been dramatically better because of his commitment. They'd had opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. But there was also something bittersweet about the whole arrangement. No amount of money brings back a father, the oldest Tyree child said in an interview. Years later, Wayne understood that. He wasn't trying to replace Dad or absolve himself of guilt. He was just trying to do right by our family because he felt an obligation. I respect that, but I'd trade every penny to have my father back. That tension between gratitude for help received and grief for what was lost captures something essential about tragedy and responsibility. Wayne did an admirable thing, but it couldn't fix what was broken. It couldn't restore a husband to his wife or a father to his children. It could only ease the financial burden of that loss, create opportunities that might not have existed otherwise. The story has taken on new relevance in recent years as the entertainment industry grapples with safety issues and the treatment of stunt performers. Despite improvements since the 1950s, stunt work remains dangerous. Performers still get hurt. Occasionally they still die. And the question of responsibility, who owes what to whom when tragedy strikes, remains complicated. Wayne's example offers one answer: the people who profit from dangerous work owe something to those who perform it, especially when that work results in injury or death. It's not just a legal question or an insurance question. It's a moral question about human obligation and decent behavior. The entertainment industry now has better insurance, better safety protocols, better compensation for stunt performers. Some of those improvements can be traced directly to Wayne's behind-the-scenes advocacy in the years after Tyree's death. His private commitment to one family led to public changes that protected thousands of workers. That's perhaps the most powerful legacy of the secret Wayne kept for 25 years. It wasn't just about supporting one widow and her children. It was about using personal guilt as motivation for systemic change, about transforming tragedy into action, about taking responsibility even when you didn't have to. The story of John Wayne and Jack Tyree's widow forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the Duke. The public Wayne was larger than life, tough, conservative, uncompromising, the embodiment of a certain kind of American masculinity. But the private Wayne was more complex, more thoughtful, more capable of sustained compassion than the public persona suggested. He carried guilt about things he couldn't change. He fulfilled obligations nobody else acknowledged. He used his wealth quietly to improve lives without seeking recognition. He was flawed and contradictory, and deeply human in ways that make him more interesting, not less. The monthly checks to Mary Tyree weren't charity. They were restitution, responsibility, and recognition of the human cost behind the Hollywood glamour. They were Wayne's way of saying, "A good man died so I could pretend to be a hero. The least I can do is take care of his family." For 25 years, he did exactly that. And for 40 years after Jack Tyree's death, nobody knew. That's not the behavior of someone seeking praise or recognition. That's the behavior of someone doing right, because it's right, regardless of whether anyone is watching. In the end, that might be the truest measure of character. Not what we do when the cameras are rolling and the audience is watching, but what we do in the quiet moments when nobody knows, and nobody's keeping score. John Wayne, for all his flaws and failures, understood that he kept a promise in the darkness. He fulfilled an obligation nobody else acknowledged. He did right by a widow and her children for a quarter-century, asking nothing in return. That's the John Wayne story Hollywood didn't tell for 40 years. But maybe it's the one worth remembering most.